So imagine someone standing at the head of a conference table, right? They're wearing the perfect suit. They're making this very deliberate eye contact and, flashing a wide, confident smile.
Right, the classic picture of leadership.
Exactly. Everything about them just screams leadership.
Yeah.
But, and here's the wild part, if that smile is forced or if they are, like, faking their enthusiasm, the blood pressure of the people sitting around that table actually goes up.
It's a profound biological response. I mean, our bodies act as these incredibly sensitive sounding boards,
Yeah.
We're physically wired to detect inauthenticity, and it often happens before our conscious minds even process what is going on in the room.
Which completely shatters that old corporate myth of putting on your armor.
Right, absolutely.
Because for decades, the advice was basically memorize the buzzwords, hide your flaws, and walk in like this untouchable, bulletproof executive. But if our nervous systems are literally spiking at the first hint of a fake persona,
That armor isn't protecting you at all.
right, it is alienating the exact people you're trained to lead.
Which really brings up the central challenge every professional faces today, because the landscape demands a completely different kind of presence now, one that balances, absolute competence with genuine human warmth.
And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We are going to explore what it actually means to own a room in the modern era.
It's a tricky balance to strike.
It really is. So our goal today is to help you, the listener, align your internal core values with your outward leadership presence. We've got a massive stack of research today, everything from Harvard Business Review pieces on emotional intelligence to the biology of power.
Lots of ground to cover.
Yeah, so we can figure out how you can filter out all that external noise and lead authentically without accidentally shooting yourself in the foot. Because, let's be honest, the advice out there is incredibly conflicting.
No, it's all over the place.
Right. Are we supposed to be stoic commanders, or are we supposed to be completely transparent, open books? Like, where do you even begin to find that balance?
Well, before you can project any kind of meaningful presence outward, you have to establish what's going on inward.
Okay, let's unpack that.
You have to start at the foundation. Based on Daniel Goleman's seminal research on emotional intelligence, that bedrock is self-awareness. But finding your authentic self doesn't mean just taking a quick personality quiz online.
Right, if only it were that easy.
Exactly. It requires a really rigorous and, frankly, often uncomfortable examination of your own life story.
So I'm curious how that actually works in practice. How does looking backward at your life story translate into a forward-looking leadership presence?
Well, Goleman's research reveals this fascinating pattern among highly effective leaders. Their drive doesn't usually come from some raw desire for power. It actually stems from a deep reframing of very difficult personal experiences.
Like what kind of experiences?
We're talking about things like overcoming a severe illness or the sudden loss of a job or facing profound rejection or discrimination.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The individuals who really find their true core, they don't view themselves as passive victims of those events. Instead, they use the crucible of those experiences to forge a sense of purpose. They extract meaning from the struggle.
And that reframing seems to trigger a massive shift in what actually motivates them to get out of bed in the morning.
Right.
Like the research talks about this vital pivot away from extrinsic rewards and toward intrinsic motivations.
Which is huge.
Because extrinsic rewards are, the easy, shiny things society tells us to chase. The massive salary, the corner office, the prestigious title.
Right.
But intrinsic motivations are deeply personal, like a desire for continuous learning or helping your team develop or driving a social cause you care about.
And let's be clear, the pressure to ignore those intrinsic drives is immense. Debra Dunn, she's a veteran technology executive, she captured the struggle beautifully in her interviews.
What did she say?
She noted that the path of accumulating material things is clearly laid out, and it's very easy to measure. Society rewards it. And if you decide to step off that specific path to pursue something intrinsically meaningful,
People think you're crazy.
literally, people around you will wonder, what is wrong with you? So you have to actively build a mental filter against those external expectations. You need that internal authority.
You have to clearly define what brings you happiness rather than just chasing what your peers define as success.
Exactly.
There's this brilliant quote from McKinsey executive Alice Woodwork that hits right on this. She observed that if your primary motivation is chasing praise and external validation, you're essentially just a greyhound chasing the mechanical rabbit around the racetrack.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
Right, you're running these exhausting laps, but you aren't heading toward anything real.
You're just running in circles.
But okay, I do want to challenge this idea for a second,
Go for it.
because it sounds wonderfully enlightened to say, Ignore external validation and find your inner truth. But if you're actively gunning for a promotion, or you're trying to convince a board to fund your startup, you are literally asking other people to validate your worth with a new title or a massive check.
That's true.
So how is that not chasing the rabbit?
Well, that's the exact trap so many ambitious people fall into. Wanting a promotion or securing funding isn't inherently bad. The danger lies in how fragile extrinsic goals are when they become your entire identity.
Oh, I see.
If your whole sense of self-worth is tied to being, say, vice president of marketing, what happens to your psychological state if the company downsizes and you lose that title?
You completely collapse.
Exactly. You collapse because the external validation is gone. Intrinsic motivation is entirely different because it's congruent with your deepest core values. True leadership is taking those abstract internal values and translating them into unbreakable leadership principles.
Okay, so an intrinsic value is something abstract like integrity. And a leadership principle is the actual rule you live by when the pressure's on.
Yes. And the research provides a stunning historical example of this translation process. It features John Huntsman, the founder of Huntsman Corporation.
Oh, the Nixon story, right?
Yes. Back in 1972, he was serving in the Nixon administration. The stakes were incredibly high, and the pressure to conform was absolute. Keep in mind, this was just before the Watergate scandal broke.
Right, a total powder keg.
Exactly. And Huntsman was ordered by his superiors to use his staff to essentially spy on political opponents and engage in dirty tricks.
So his extrinsic motivation, keeping this powerful, prestigious job in the White House, was suddenly on a direct collision course with his intrinsic moral compass.
He was facing the ultimate test of external expectations. But because he had done the internal work to know his intrinsic core, he didn't even agonize over the choice. He had translated his values into a clear leadership principle. He just refused the order and walked away from one of the most powerful administrations in the world. He simply wouldn't compromise his moral center for a title.
That is the armor-piercing power of knowing your true north.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that makes perfect sense. For massive moral dilemmas, we lock down our core values. But let's apply this to everyday corporate life.
Sure.
If we know our intrinsic core, does that mean we should just walk into the office and project our unfiltered inner thoughts at all times? I mean, is the goal to just say whatever is on our minds because we're being authentic?
That assumption brings us to probably the most dangerous trap in modern management. Herminia Ibarra calls it the authenticity paradox. And the short answer to your question is no. You absolutely should not project your unfiltered thoughts at all times.
So this is where the whole modern advice of bring your whole self to work sort of falls apart.
It really does. Ibarra's research completely shatters the myth that a leader should always be an open book. There's a very specific case study in her work about a woman named Cynthia.
Right.
Cynthia was a general manager in a healthcare organization who had just received a massive promotion. Her new role drastically expanded the range of businesses she oversaw, and her direct reports multiplied tenfold. She was stepping into entirely unfamiliar territory.
Which naturally means she's feeling severe imposter syndrome, like the ground is completely shifting under her feet.
And Cynthia deeply believed in transparent, collaborative leadership. She wanted to be radically authentic. So on her very first day, she stands in front of her massive new team, bares her soul, and confesses, I want to do this job, but it is scary, and I'm going to need your help to figure this out.
Which, I mean, it sounds like a beautiful, vulnerable moment on paper. But the case study shows it was a complete disaster.
It destroyed her credibility on day one. The air just left the room.
Ah, man.
Her new team didn't want an open diary, you know. They were looking for a competent captain to steer the ship through a complex organizational transition. Her confession didn't build trust, it induced panic.
So she essentially prioritized her own desire to vent her anxiety over what her team actually needed in that moment.
Exactly. Ibarra points out that when we take on new roles, our natural psychological impulse is to protect our identities. We retreat to familiar behaviors.
Makes sense.
The research identifies two very different psychological profiles that dictate how people react in these moments. The first profile is the chameleon.
Right.
These are individuals with high self-monitoring skills. They adapt easily to the demands of any situation, shifting their persona to match the room without feeling fake. They are constantly managing their public image.
But the obvious risk for chameleons is that they eventually come across as completely disingenuous, right? People start to feel like the chameleon has no actual moral center because their opinions just change depending on who they're talking to.
Spot on. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the true-to-selfers. These are low self-monitors, like Cynthia. They express exactly what they think and feel, regardless of what the situation demands. They value absolute consistency.
But the danger for the true-to-selfer is rigid inflexibility. Like, Cynthia's commitment to being transparent actively damaged her ability to lead.
Because authenticity is not about rigid adherence to one single static true self.
Mm.
Human beings are wildly complex. I mean, we possess multiple selves depending on our roles as parents, friends, or managers.
Yeah, that's true.
Being a rigid true to selfer can actually become a heavy psychological anchor. It prevents you from growing into a new set of responsibilities because you use authenticity as a convenient excuse to stay inside your comfort zone.
Okay, so let's bring this back to you, the listener. If being a chameleon makes you look fake, but rigid honesty makes you look incompetent like Cynthia,
Yeah.
how do you actually bridge that gap? How do you take on a massive new challenge without feeling like a total fraud?
The mechanism to bridge that gap requires a complete shift in how you frame your goals. Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck identifies the crucial difference between performance goals and learning goals.
How do those differ in a practical setting, like on Monday morning?
Well, when you operate with a performance goal, your primary psychological focus is on proving to everyone else that you already possess a certain attribute. You're trying to show the room how smart, capable, or decisive you are.
Right.
This mindset immediately triggers imposter syndrome because you secretly know you don't have all the answers. You're stuck playing a role, terrified of being exposed.
You're just constantly on the defensive.
But a learning goal functions entirely differently. A learning goal motivates you to actively develop that new attribute. You're no longer trying to prove you're flawless. You're giving yourself explicit permission to experiment and grow into the new responsibilities.
That takes so much pressure off.
It completely removes the pressure of having to project a static, perfect identity on day one.
So the research suggests treating your identity with almost a playful frame of mind. Instead of viewing professional growth as this agonizing drudgery where you're betraying your true self, you should experiment with possible selves.
Yes.
The story of Maria in the source material really illustrates this perfectly.
Maria's situation is a prime example of someone who needed to edit her own life narrative.
Right, because Maria had always anchored her personal identity around being the loyal peacekeeper for her large extended family. She was the one who smoothed over arguments and sacrificed her own ambitions to support everyone else.
Which is a noble role.
It was honorable and it was true. But clinging to that specific version of her authenticity at work was paralyzing her. She was far too passive. She kept getting passed over for big leadership assignments because she was too busy playing the peacekeeper.
She was essentially trapped by an outdated version of her own story.
Exactly. So she worked with an executive coach to search her past for a different defining moment. And she reframed her story around a time in her 20s when she boldly left her family to backpack across the world alone for 18 months.
That's quite the shift.
Yeah. That adventurous, decisive traveler was also her authentic self. By consciously adopting that bolder sense of self, she finally asked for and secured the major promotion she deserved.
I love that.
I think about it almost like updating your phone's operating system.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
The old OS wasn't fake. It ran the apps you needed at the time. But you simply can't run the heavy, complex applications of a new executive role on an outdated operating system. You have to download the new software. You aren't throwing the phone away, you're just optimizing it for the new environment.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. And once you've downloaded that new operating system, once you have fully adopted that learning mindset, the next practical challenge is communication.
Right.
How do you physically and verbally project this evolved presence when you step into a high-stakes meeting?
Which brings us right to the incredibly practical advice from Amy Gensu's book, Own the Room. She talks about finding your signature voice. But to find it, you first have to recognize the two ineffective extremes most professionals default to under pressure.
The driving and supportive voices.
Yes, first is the driving voice. This happens when someone becomes overly aggressive, tries to dominate the conversation, and just bulldozes over objections.
And the polar opposite is the supportive voice. This is when an individual shrinks back, becomes overly accommodating, and prioritizes group harmony at the expense of actually making a decision.
But neither extreme actually works.
No, they don't. Your true signature voice exists in the tension between the two. It's the perfect balance between your voice for self, which is your ability to clearly demonstrate your unique value, and your voice for others, which is your capacity to deeply connect with your stakeholders.
And to achieve this balance, she introduces the ACE framework. ACE, let's break down the mechanics of that.
Okay, so the A stands for assumptions. This is the internal mental conditioning we discussed earlier. You must continually update your personal value proposition. You have to clearly understand the unique expertise you bring to the table.
Because knowing that changes how you carry yourself.
Exactly. When you are crystal clear on your own worth, it generates a quiet internal confidence. You no longer feel the psychological need to overcompensate by yelling or dominating the room with a driving voice.
And that mental grounding leads directly to the C, which is communication. This is the tactical execution part. It involves mastering framing, utilizing structured advocacy, and developing 3 distinct levels of listening.
Right.
But I want to pause on structured advocacy for a second because that sounds like heavy corporate jargon. What does that actually look like in practice?
Structured advocacy is essentially the antidote to rambling.
Thank goodness.
Right. Instead of thinking out loud and just hoping the room figures out your point, you state your core assertion up front. You follow it with a few pieces of supporting evidence, and then you end by asking a targeted question to invite collaboration.
Okay.
It is a highly disciplined way of speaking that projects immense clarity.
And that targeted question feeds directly into the listening component. The framework outlines surface listening, which is really just passively hearing the words.
Right.
Then there's issues-based listening, where you are filtering out the noise to identify the core operational problems.
Yeah.
But the highest tier is emotions-based listening.
And emotion-based listening is where the true connection happens. You're actively analyzing the nonverbal cues. You're listening to the tone of voice, observing the body language, and identifying the hidden anxieties or, the unspoken agendas driving the discussion.
Finally, the E in the ACE framework stands for energy. You have to actively manage your physical and emotional state to project a calm equilibrium. Because if you sprint into a room acting frantic and overwhelmed, the entire room instantly absorbs that frantic energy.
This aligns perfectly with extensive data collected by Sylvia Ann Hewlett on executive presence. She conducted these massive surveys 10 years apart, first in 2012 and then in 2022.
And what changed over that decade?
She found that while decisiveness and confidence remained absolute prerequisites for leadership, the perceived importance of inclusiveness absolutely skyrocketed over that decade.
That data highlights such a crucial distinction. We often think of executive presence as merely how you look and sound, the tailored suit, the perfect posture. But true leadership presence is about what you do and say to focus on the people around you.
Exactly.
It's about bringing the room along with you rather than just talking at them.
And that specific element of energy from the ACE framework brings us full circle to the physical biology of human connection. We really have to look at how our bodies literally alter their chemistry based on how we hold ourselves.
Amy Cuddy's research on this is just fascinating. She studies how we can biologically hack our own confidence before we even open our mouths. She focuses on power poses.
Right, the Wonder Woman pose.
Yeah. If you stand in an expansive posture, feet planted firmly apart, hands on your hips, chest open for just 2 minutes before a high-stakes presentation, it literally alters your hormone levels.
It's amazing.
Your testosterone, which drives assertiveness, increases. Meanwhile, your cortisol, the hormone responsible for stress and panic, measurably drops. You're biologically manufacturing a sense of command.
However, Cuddy's research, along with work from Emma Supla and Brene Brown, offers a massive caveat here. Projecting strength and command is only half the equation. If a leader only projects strength, they create an environment of distance and fear. Command must be paired with genuine warmth. Warmth is the biological mechanism that actually builds trust.
And this connects directly back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive. Paul Niedenthal's research on resonance. Our nervous systems are acting like acute sounding boards.
We constantly mirror the emotional states of the people leading us. If a leader tries to fake empathy or projects a manufactured emotion, the team's collective brain detects the dissonance immediately.
That's why the team's blood pressure spikes.
Yes, we are biologically wired to reject inauthenticity.
But wait a minute, I have to stop and point out a massive contradiction here.
Uh-oh.
We spent the second segment dissecting Cynthia's failure. Cynthia was vulnerable. She openly told her new team she was terrified and needed their help, yet we agreed that her confession destroyed her credibility.
Right.
Now, the research is telling us that vulnerability and warmth are the ultimate keys to building trust. So how do we actually reconcile those two ideas?
This raises an important question, and it's probably the most critical distinction in modern management. The difference between Cynthia's failure and effective vulnerability lies in the energy component of the ACE framework.
How so?
Cynthia didn't use vulnerability to connect with her team. She used it to dump her unmanaged, frantic anxiety onto their shoulders. She signaled a complete lack of competence. Her team didn't feel a warm connection. They felt the terrifying realization that the pilot of their airplane was panicking.
She failed to provide the baseline of strength and stability.
Exactly. True vulnerability, the kind that fosters deep resonance, looks entirely different. It requires the leader to be fully in command of the situation first.
Oh, okay.
From that place of calm stability, vulnerability looks like admitting a miscalculation without spiraling into a panic. It looks like treating an employee's honest mistake as a learning opportunity rather than a fireable offense. Or taking a quiet moment to genuinely check on a colleague who's struggling personally.
So it's profound warmth, but backed by clear-headed competence.
Unequivocally, the team must know you're human, but they must also trust you can navigate the storm.
It's the difference between bleeding all of your team and simply showing them you have a heartbeat. You still have to land the plane.
That's a great way to put it.
Well, let's retrace the path we've taken today, because we have covered incredible ground. We started by looking inward, establishing our self-awareness, and learning to ruthlessly filter out the external expectations that push us toward fragile, extrinsic rewards. We learned to translate our intrinsic values into actionable principles, much like John Huntsman did in the face of immense pressure.
And from there, we explored the authenticity paradox. We realized that clinging to one rigid version of ourselves is a trap. Instead, we have to adopt a learning mindset, giving ourselves the grace to experiment with new, evolved versions of our authentic selves as we take on heavier responsibilities.
Then we took those mental frameworks into the physical room using the ACE model. We learned to check our assumptions, communicate with structured advocacy and emotions-based listening, and actively manage the energy we broadcast.
And finally, we uncovered the biological reality of presence. We must project the unwavering competence of a leader while radiating the genuine, resonance-building warmth of a human being.
Which brings this entirely back to you. Whether you are leading a highly complex global matrix organization with multiple bosses across 6 time zones, or you are simply trying to navigate your own career pivot, your presence dictates your reality. The era of the bulletproof executive is over. The modern landscape demands a signature voice that is uniquely yours, rooted in learning, competence, and genuine warmth.
It's a new paradigm.
It really is. But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We just established that human brains are incredibly sensitive biological lie detectors. We rely on physical cues, eye contact, and subtle body language to build trust and detect resonance. So, what happens to leadership presence in a world increasingly dominated by remote work, Zoom screens, and asynchronous communication? If our biology requires physical proximity to establish trust, how do you project your authentic signature voice when you're reduced to a two-dimensional box on a screen? How do you own the room when there isn't even a room? Think about it.